another episode of Inquiring Minds. I am Steve Harper. With me, as always, is my amazing co-host, Donna Karlin. Donna, how are you doing today?
I'm great. And how are you going? That's how they
I'm,
say it in Australia.
yeah, that was usually you're Canadian, but that was a different thing. Hi, how
I
you going?
was
Yeah,
just talking to somebody from Australia. How you
I'm doing
going?
excellent. Trip on the Barbie and everything. No, I'm good. I'm doing good. I'm doing really good. What are we
Good,
talking
good.
about today? We're already off the rails. I can see. So with
So,
too much coffee
well,
today.
there you go. I needed intravenously, I think.
Yep.
Last week we spoke about personal growth.
Yep.
Well, guess what we're talking about this week?
Personal growth.
Failure. No, we're
What?
talking about failure. So, the most common cause of failure, and I was thinking a lot about this one, it's being paralyzed by the fear of uncertainty and ending up doing nothing. How do you like that one?
Yeah, that's a good one. I have I have more experience with this than I care to admit. Um, Failure is it is the it you can read all sorts of things about this, right? I just actually listened to a podcast on failure that was talking about how great failure is because there's so many lessons that can be learned from that. And I was thinking
Yeah,
the whole time as this guy's talking, like, yeah, that's because you didn't like go through the failure. Like you, it's good to talk about it in theory, but when you're doing it, it really, really doesn't bode well. It sucks, and I think it can be hard, and it's kind of a funny topic after our conversation about personal development, because I think one of the things we touched on is when people think about that, when they don't achieve a certain thing, they feel like they failed, and how that can put a dark cloud on everything that goes on in your life, and I think that can be debilitating. And so I'm curious as to what brought this to the forefront for you, and just how honest we're going to be about failure during this
yeah.
episode.
So this is a different slant, though. It's not, when we don't feel we succeed, we feel it like a failure. This is when we don't handle uncertainty and do nothing. It creates failure because we're stagnating. We're
Because
doing nothing.
are you
We won't
thinking about it in
confront.
terms of because we are we're we're fearful of the failure and so we don't take the action, or because
No,
of
we're
okay,
fearful of the uncertainty.
okay,
Okay, we live. Oh, just think about it for a moment. There's so many factors that are happening in the world as it stands. One is COVID. It comes and goes. We have no control over the virus. We absolutely don't. And some people are so paralyzed by doing anything in the midst of a virus that might stay with them for a long time, long COVID, whatever it is, that they do nothing and they hibernate, and therefore they start failing at things. Another one is what's going on with the artificial intelligence surge, and the we're going to be out of a job anyway, and all the stories that they tell themselves. So why am I putting so much effort into this? um, and they end up failing. Or in an organizational context, you have people who say, I'm never going to get the promotion anyway, I'm going to do the bare minimum, or
so why
or
try? Yeah.
they just bought it. This happened fairly recently. A company that I work with acquired two other fair sized companies. Now, the story that immediately happens is they only need X amount of vice presidents, they only need one president, one CEO. One of us is going to go. And they're so paralyzed by the fact that it's totally out of their control. And there's all this uncertainty around the acquisition that they end up failing. And the last example I'm going to give you is in the political realm. When I used to work in more political arenas in Canada, you could have a confidence vote where you lose the confidence in the party in power and actually ask for an election to be called,
Mm-hmm.
which means the government still goes on. The political arm has to stop working until a new election is called. So the work of the day is done by the bureaucracy, but everyone else comes to a standstill. And I was working in a minister's office at the time where the staff was all paralyzed because, the party's going to be ousted and the other party's going to come into power. We're all going to be out of jobs. And they were paralyzed. They did nothing. And I said to them, you have two choices. You could do nothing and just wait for the other shoe to fall, or whatever the expression is, or you could do so much in one day and be so productive that everyone will take notice and you'll all be snapped up by other entities, whether it was the bureaucracy or whatever else. And they did more in that day than they had ever done. They were so proud of themselves. They were energized. They were running around getting things signed and stuff, happening. Each and every one of them got a job. Those that were paralyzed in other departments with under other ministers, not one of them was able to get a job because they were their own self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what I'm looking at. Like, how does the fear that's turns up because of uncertainty creates you to be paralyzed and not make any decisions, to be stagnant and wait for the rest of the world to figure things out for you? How in the world are you supposed to succeed in that kind of environment? that's
Well,
that's
yeah.
the
I mean, it's
failure
an
I'm looking
interesting perspective. I kind of had the imagery of people that are like, well, the uncertainty, I'm just going to pull the covers over my head and, see what happens because it's going to be bad, whatever it is, right? The only way that you really determine how to overcome uncertainty is to take it on. And some of the problems that I think people have, and when I suspect some of our listeners will be, yeah, well, that's great, but I don't have Donna in my back pocket. And but that's actually a real. If that's your response, then that's actually a good reason to have somebody like Donna or myself in your back pocket, because you sometimes need, when you can't see the forest for the trees, and you can't realize that your inaction is ultimately going to cost you more and will lead to an acceleration of your failure, then you need somebody that can actually, reset perspective and help you navigate whatever it is that's going to happen. Like with you stepping up and telling them, make yourself so invaluable that they can't get rid of you. That is the critical piece to, that's the success right there. That right there is the opportunity for you to say, look, you can either sit here and you can do like everybody else, and you are right, 100%, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. You will get plugged, you will get fired, you will be out on the street having to look for your next opportunity. Or you can say, look, I'm going to do everything I can to show up, do the best job I can, give the best possible effort, and I can ask some questions about what's it going to take for me to be a part of the next, leadership team that comes in, or the next, party that is taking power. How do I make myself an irreplaceable part of that team, right? And I
That's
think
right.
that is, it's brilliant. And I think part of the challenge is when you start to face uncertainty and you can't see any other possibility about what's before you, right? That's when you need to start asking questions, not just of yourself, but you need to be asking of somebody who can actually give you some perspective, help reset your view or your understanding of the situation. And they may not have all the answers, and they certainly may not be able to be a direct guide through and a navigator of the turmoil, but they can bring a perspective that would be a refresh to what you have today. Because what's your other choice, right? To do nothing and let uncertainty just absorb you, and that's going to lead you to failure anyway. So if you're comfortable with that, and that's the way you want to wave the white flag and just surrender. But I think the vast majority of people are like, well, no, that would be dumb, why would I do that? But sometimes you need somebody else to sort of help you through that process, through that different perspectives, different questions, different ideas. And that's when you need to, pull the lifeline and get some help.
Exactly. It's a great thing to reflect on, I think. When do things push my buttons to the point where I stop and I don't know how to navigate it, so it paralyzes me? I think that we could be very self-reflective in these kinds of instances. learn our responses to certain situations, what triggers us, what triggers that paralysis, and to figure out, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
I think we are, for the most part, when we are in that kind of mindset, you know, what we do is we don't say, who could help me through it? We just are paralyzed. And because of that, time goes, situations go, opportunities go by the wayside, and we don't embrace anything because we're so focused on watching something about to crash and burn, or that uncertainty with no stability hit us, that we don't do anything, and we don't reflect on it. We just don't do anything, and that includes reflecting. So what could be some of the key tips that people can share with how they navigate uncertainty? Because
Or
this
how to
is
avoid
the
it. I mean,
not, well, how to avoid it, how to navigate it, I think. How to act in spite of what's uncertain. Like I look at situations where no one knows what's going to happen next, for example. And I go, fine, what can you do within that context? There's always something that you can do within that context, and focus on what you can do. And by the time you finish that, your perspective of the entire situation just might change. Regardless, you're still going to get something done and achieved, no matter what the outcome, um, or what's external to you. And I think that it would be great to hear how people navigate uncertainty, because everyone has a different way if they actually deal with it. If they don't deal with it, it would be great to hear that too, and what it's done in their lives in order for them to not crash and burn.
yeah, I
So,
would I would definitely be interested in how people do it. I think for me, I mean, I just literally had this experience today. We have a pretty major event happening with my software company that is stuff completely out of my control, but would have typically made me very anxious and very on edge. And I would have just wanted to bury my head in the sand and say, gosh, I hope everybody else figures it out because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I can contribute. But really, what I decided to do, in all honesty, and I had no idea we were talking about this topic today or how it would fit in so perfectly. But the first thing I did was I looked at what occurred last night. I started reviewing some of the information that had been shared, and I got on the call with one of our main points of contact, on my dev team, and I said, hey, look, this is normally something I would try to ignore because I don't like dealing with it. It adds stress. It adds frustration. But this has been a problem before. We didn't resolve it, quite as effectively as I would like, because otherwise it would be back. So I need to ask more important questions. But before I actually reached out, I asked myself specifically: is this something that I will be better for by you know asking the questions that I need to ask, or getting the conversation started that needs to start? Or will I be sitting here kind of on pins and needles wondering, is it going to get fixed or is it not going to get fixed? I
mm,
need to ask these questions. So when I reached out, we started the conversation. There was no blame. There's no assignment of responsibility in terms of who did what right or wrong. But I said, hey, look, I looked through everything. I really appreciate you jumping in and taking care of this to this degree. And I agree mostly with the plan of action, but I have some questions. And I asked the question, and one question that I asked brought up a point that nobody had considered. And part of the reason that occurred the way it did was asking that question sort of said, hey, this is why if we had asked that question 6 months ago, this wouldn't have bubbled up today, right? So when you look at it, and the reason I share that with our audience is, had I not, if I had, kind of pulled the covers over my head and just hoped it went away, it might not be a failure, but it might, and it could be a problem, and it could have dire consequences. Um, as it turns out, it asking the question, getting involved, not running from it, and sort of kind of going head first into the uncertainty and saying, okay, I'm not going to let you beat me on this. I'm going to at least add my contribution here. Whether it helps or doesn't help, don't know, but I'm going to put it out there. And because I did, they are actually thinking about something that nobody, because they're, no offense, technical propeller head guys, they don't look sometimes. And I can sometimes see the forest for the trees, and I can see things from a different perspective. And because of that, by saying something and not being afraid of the uncertainty of contributing, I may have led us down a path that could actually be beneficial. And so I use it as kind of a perfect timely example by, when you feel that moment of, oh, I don't know, the uncertainty, and you're like, that's actually when you need to start asking questions. That's when you need to lean into it. That's when you need to, pull the string and say, I need some help. I need some guidance, and I need to stop running from it, because the result of me hiding or ignoring it is probably going to be way worse and way scarier than if I just face it right now.
And the difference between the failure that you started talking about at the beginning of our conversation and now is very evident to me. When we try something and we don't succeed and we fail, and somebody says, okay, well, that's a good place to be because it could be a stepping stone. Failures usually are stepping stones for doing something different.
You don't
If you,
feel it in the moment, but
yeah,
most of the time they are. Yes.
that's different. But when you're paralyzed by uncertainty and you do nothing,
Yeah. You're
that's not a stepping
guaranteeing it
stone. You have
almost.
absolutely nothing to build on, nothing to change, nothing to alter. So, look at it from that perspective. If I do nothing, that is a failure with no stepping stone to anything successful
Yeah.
whatsoever. That is an end point. When you fail by trying something and it didn't work, that is a starting point to doing something that just might. So look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah. I love it. Well, so I would love to know what our audience thinks of this particular topic, because it's it's a juicy one.
Yeah.
So, Donna, how can people share their thoughts, their their strategies, and how they deal with it? I think that would be a fascinating look into how other people kind of handle these things. How can they best get involved and share that with us, and maybe even ask some direct questions for a follow-up episode on this particular topic?
The best way is to join our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna, Karlin, and Steve Harper. Let us know your 3 cents, what your ideas are, what your thoughts are, your opinions, your personal stories. We would love to hear them, or start a conversation of your own with the community. It'd be terrific. Or our podcast on our YouTube channel, podcast channels. We're everywhere. What could I
Yeah.
tell you? Um, it would be wonderful to hear from you.
Yeah, and on that vein, I had somebody that told me just the other day that they've been listening on one of the podcast platforms, and then lo and behold, they're sitting there with their Alexa on their desk, and Inquiring Minds was suggested to them by Amazon. And they were like, "Oh, that is the coolest thing," and I'm like, "You must pay for that." I'm like, "No, we don't pay for it. It's just you know the stars aligned. Amazon is recognizing us. We're getting a lot of great traction with this show on all of the platforms, and they're all taking notice, which is great. But I thought that was super cool for somebody to say, I saw your cover on my desk, and I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And they told me the whole story, and they're like, I listen to it all the time in my car, but that's not related to Alexa in any way. So to have Amazon suggested as a podcast that I might enjoy was kind of really fun. And so it's great to see that we're getting some of that traction. But as Donna said, we're available on Facebook. We show these episodes. We've got the YouTube channel. We definitely recommend that you subscribe there. And we're on all of the major podcast platforms, which is great. In fact, we're on a couple that I didn't even know we were on, thanks to people that have reached out and said, hey, I heard you on apps that I've never even heard of, which is great. So I
You
love
know,
it. So it's fantastic. Well, Donna, this was a great conversation, a great topic. I really appreciate it. We appreciate you guys tuning in and watching and listening. and being a part of the Inquiring Minds community. And we look forward to bringing you another episode next week. But until then, Donna, have a great rest of your day.
You too.